It was a cold Friday evening in the heart of the city, the kind where neon lights flickered against shop windows and hurried footsteps echoed on the sidewalks. Inside a bustling supermarket, Emma clutched a small box of baby formula against her chest, her heart heavy with the weight of choices no mother should have to make. Her baby, only 6 months old, had been crying non-stop at home, and Emma knew that formula was the only thing that could ease his hunger. But as she stared down at her nearly empty wallet, the reality crashed over her like a wave. She couldn't afford it. Every dollar was already stretched between rent, overdue bills, and bus fare for work. With trembling hands, she placed the formula box on the customer service counter, whispering to the clerk that she needed to return it. The words cut deeper than she imagined, each syllable laced with guilt and despair. Shoppers passed by, some stealing quick glances, others too caught up in their own lives to notice. To Emma, it felt like the entire world had shrunk to that small counter, her shame on display for everyone to see. Just then, in the middle of her quiet surrender, a voice behind her broke the silence, calm, deep, and unexpected. She turned slightly, not yet knowing that the stranger who had spoken would change the course of her life forever. "Excuse me," the voice said, warm yet steady, carrying a quiet authority that made Emma pause. She turned to see a man in his mid-40s, dressed in a simple gray suit, holding a basket with just a loaf of bread and a carton of milk. His eyes weren't judging, only concerned, as if he had seen her pain long before she spoke a word. Emma's cheeks burned with embarrassment, and she quickly shook her head, murmuring that she was fine. But the man didn't move away. Instead, he glanced at the formula on the counter and then back at her, his brow furrowed in thought. "Is that for your baby?" he asked softly, not loud enough for others to hear. Emma hesitated, her pride warring with her desperation, before nodding. Something about the sincerity in his tone loosened the knot in her chest. "I'll cover it," he said simply, pulling out his wallet before she could protest. Shock flashed across Emma's face. "No, I can't let you do that," she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of her struggles. But the man just offered a faint smile, the kind that carried both kindness and a strange sadness. "Please," he replied, "every child deserves to be fed. This isn't charity, it's humanity." Emma stood frozen, torn between gratitude and disbelief, as the cashier looked back and forth between them, waiting for her response. In that moment, surrounded by strangers in a supermarket, she felt the walls she had built around her heart begin to tremble. Emma finally allowed the man to pay, though her hands trembled as she accepted the bag with the formula tucked safely inside. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible, yet heavy with sincerity. The man nodded, as if the gratitude wasn't necessary, and began to walk away. But something about him lingered in Emma's mind, his quiet demeanor, his gentle words, the way he carried himself with a kind of hidden weight. Gathering her courage, she asked, "Why would you do this for me? You don't even know me." He paused, turning slightly, his eyes soft but clouded with something unspoken. "Because once, a long time ago, someone did the same for me," he said. His voice cracked faintly, as though those words carried a memory he rarely revisited. Curiosity stirred within Emma, but before she could ask more, the man offered a polite smile and started toward the exit. The crowd swallowed him up quickly, leaving Emma standing in the middle of the store with her baby's formula pressed tightly against her chest, her heart pounding with a mix of relief and wonder. She didn't know his name, or why he had chosen that moment to step into her life. All she knew was that a stranger had seen her struggle and responded with compassion when the world had looked away. And though the encounter had lasted only a few minutes, it felt as though the universe had whispered to her, reminding her that kindness still existed, even in places she least expected to find it that night. After finally feeding her baby and watching him drift into peaceful sleep, Emma sat at the edge of her small bed replaying the scene in her mind. Who was that man? Why had his words carried such weight, as if he, too, had known the sting of hunger or the ache of desperation? She couldn't shake the image of his sad smile, or the way he had walked away without seeking thanks or recognition. Days passed, and Emma returned to her routine, working long shifts at a diner, rushing home to care for her baby, and constantly juggling bills. Then, one evening as she wiped down tables, she looked up to find the same man sitting quietly in a corner booth. He was dressed simply again, no flashy watch, no sign of extravagance, just that same calm presence. Her breath caught. Approaching cautiously, she asked, "You're the man from the store, aren't you?" He nodded, his lips curving into a faint smile. "I didn't expect you to remember." Emma almost laughed, though her eyes filled with tears. "How could I forget? You helped me when I had no one." The man leaned forward, lowering his voice. "And you reminded me why I never want to forget where I came from." Confused, Emma tilted her head, but he didn't explain further. Instead, he left a generous tip on the table, stood up, and gave her a nod of respect before walking out into the night. Emma stared after him, her heart racing with questions she couldn't answer. A week later, Emma's manager called her into the back office. Nervous, she braced for bad news, but instead, he handed her an envelope. Inside was a letter on elegant stationery, along with a business card. The letter read, "Emma, sometimes life tests us in ways that feel unbearable, but it's in those moments that small acts of kindness can change everything. Years ago, I was a child of a struggling single mother, just like your little one. A stranger once bought my mother food when she couldn't afford it. That simple gesture planted a seed of hope in us both. Today, I am fortunate enough to carry that same kindness forward. If you ever need support, whether it's food, childcare, or even work, please reach out. You are not alone." Emma's hands shook as she looked down at the card. Printed neatly was the man's name, Daniel Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Industries, one of the city's largest companies. Her mind reeled. The man who had quietly paid for her baby's formula, who had sat in her diner like any ordinary customer, was a millionaire CEO. Tears blurred her vision as the weight of his words sank in. He hadn't just helped her, he had shared a piece of his own story, one that mirrored hers in a way she never expected. Emma clutched the letter to her chest, realizing that kindness, when carried forward, could ripple through generations. For the first time in months, she felt something she thought she had lost: hope. In the days that followed, Emma held on to Daniel's letter like a lifeline. Though pride told her not to reach out, the reassurance that someone believed in her gave her strength to keep going. She worked harder at the diner, began saving small amounts whenever she could, and poured her love into raising her baby with renewed determination. Then one morning, as she arrived at work, she found Daniel sitting in his familiar booth once more. This time, instead of slipping away, he asked if he could join her during her break. Over coffee, he spoke of his mother. The nights she skipped meals so he could eat, the jobs she worked to keep a roof over their heads, and the stranger who had once given them the gift of dignity when they had none. "My success," Daniel said quietly, "isn't just mine. It's built on her sacrifices and the kindness of people who believed in us." He looked at Emma with steady eyes. "And I believe in you too." Emma blinked back tears, overwhelmed not by the promise of help, but by the reminder that her struggle did not define her future. In that small booth, surrounded by the clatter of dishes and hum of conversation, she felt her burdens lighten. She realized that kindness, even in its simplest form, had the power to bridge the widest gaps, between strangers, between generations, between despair and hope. As she returned to her shift, Emma glanced at her baby's picture tucked in her apron and whispered a silent promise: one day, she too would pass this kindness forward.